first few points about the cranial nerves, and then I will shift to the our topic which was remaining there. That was imaging of abdomen. Few topics we will cover it up. So we will start with the cranial nerves. So cranial nerves, yesterday we have said that they are 12 in number: olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, and so on. And few important ones we have to remember. First two, olfactory and optic are tracts. Olfactory passes from cribriform plate. Optic passes from the optic canal. Then second, third and fourth cranial nerve, oculomotor and trochlear. They join midbrain. They arise from the midbrain. Oculomotor and trochlear, these two nerves, they pass from superior orbital fissure. Then there is trigeminal, fifth largest cranial nerve, trigeminal, abducens, facial, and vestibulocochlear. Fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. These four nerves arises from the pons. So fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth arises from the pons. Trigeminal divides into three, that is ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular. Ophthalmic goes from the superior orbital fissure, it is sensory in nature. Then comes the second, maxillary passes from foramen rotundum, and the mandibular passes from the foramen ovale. Trigeminal is chiefly sensory. In mandibular part, there are muscles of mastication which are supplied. Abducens is again an extraocular muscle now. It is a sixth cranial nerve, passes from superior orbital fissure. Then there is a facial nerve. Facial nerve is seventh cranial nerve. It comes from the pons, enters into the interacoustic meatus. Then from there it goes to the stylomastoid foramen, and it supplies the muscles of facial expression. That is chief function. Then there is a vestibulocochlear nerve. Two components, vestibulo is for equilibrium, cochlear is for hearing. This also passes from internal acoustic meatus. It also passes from internal acoustic meatus. Then we talk about remaining last four. One is glossopharyngeal, then vagus, then accessory, and hypoglossal. These four arises from medulla oblongata. These four arises from medulla oblongata. Glossopharyngeal 9th, vagus 10th, accessory 11th. All these three nerves passes from jugular foramen. Passes from the jugular foramen. Only now, that is hypoglossal 12th cranial nerve, passes from hypoglossal canal. So this is a short summary of this. This is what we are seeing yesterday. Again, cranial number 1, olfactory, it is sensory. Cranial number 2, optic, again it is sensory. Cranial number 3, oculomotor, chiefly it is motor and also has a parasympathetic fibers. Then the fourth cranial nerve, that is trochlear, that is again a motor, supplies only one muscle of extraocular muscle, that is superior oblique muscle. Then as we go ahead, fifth cranial nerve, that is trigeminal, divided into three parts. Ophthalmic, again it is sensory. Maxillary, it is sensory. Mandibular, it is mixed because it also has motor fibers. We have to remember mandibular nerve is the first arch nerve which supplies muscles of mastication. It supplies the muscles of mastication. And then the sixth cranial nerve, that is called abducens or abducent, it supplies the lateral rectus muscle of the eyeball, extraocular muscle of the eyeball. It is motor in nature. Then seventh, that is called facial. Facial, chiefly it is motor, but it is mixed because it also carries a sensory information and secretomotor information from parasympathetic. Then eighth, that is vestibulocochlear. It is sensory in nature. Then glossopharyngeal, ninth cranial nerve, which is mixed in nature. Okay, both sensory as well as the motor supplies. So then the vagus, it is mixed. Now you have to remember one more word here. It is chiefly a parasympathetic in nature. Then the 11th cranial nerve. is also called accessory. It is also called accessory. Accessory is a, and it supplies two important muscles. That is what you have to remember. That is sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. It is motor in nature. And hypoglossal. That's unique now, which supplies motor supply to muscles of tongue. It supplies the muscles of tongue. We're going to get its reference during development why it supplies muscles of tongue. This is what we are just revised our cranial nerves, and now we will shift to the remaining part of the abdominal imaging. Last time in abdominal imaging, we talked about this. We briefly will go through again what is called as the KUB abdomen. That is called KUB abdomen. So I'm starting with abdominal imaging. As usual, whenever we say the KUB or the abdomen, see what you are supposed to see. You are supposed to see the lower two ribs. You should have to see the pelvic girdle, lumbar vertebrae, and then this is what we call KUB. K stands for kidney, U stands for unibladder, and B for bladder. As a traditional name, why usually we go for this type of X-ray? Indication. One first indication is first indication trauma. Then there is a pain in abdomen. Then there will be a perforation, suspected perforation in the stomach or intestine. So gas will leak and gas will come under the diaphragm. Then there will be kidney, urinary bladder, any stones. That is what we are supposed to. Renal colic, intestinal obstruction is what we talk about. And the important concept, whenever we do any X-ray of abdomen, we do it NBM, preparation. NBM stands for nil by mouth, at least for 8 hours. To remove the gases, we give activated charcoal and enzyme, that is 3 tablets in the night, we get in the market. And solid waste, that is laxatives such as Dulcolax, 2 tablets in the night. This is what usually we do for all the X-rays. Then what we are supposed to see, the lower rib, lumbar vertebrae, upper part of the hip bone, sacrum and sacroiliac joint. What we see at posterior, dome of diaphragm, psoas major muscle, kidney with the perirenal fat, and the important thing is the funding gas shadow. This is what we do generally for the X-ray abdomen. What you see here, left side X-ray. Can you see this? Is it normal, abnormal? Can you see the circulations here? This is the, what is this? This is the large intestine. Is it, whose X-ray is this? If you see the primary shadow, this is a female X-ray and you can see the shadows. What difference you see between the left X-ray and the right X-ray? See right X-ray, can you see this inverted D-shaped structure? Can you see this inverted D-shaped structure? This means there is obstruction, small intestinal obstruction. This is called inverted D sign. Multilateral type steps, 1, 2, 3. This is what we call it as intestinal obstruction. Can very clearly see in the X-ray also. Then we can now, if I want to study the GIT, we have to go for something called as barium studies. Now I will just, because we have already talked about, so I will just tell you. If I want to see upper GIT, what I am supposed to do? If I want to see the esophagus, because pharynx is done, so we know there is a deglutination process. So there is a compound called as a barium sulfate. To study the GI tract, the barium sulfate is a compound which can be used as a contrast medium, which is radio opaque. So what it does, it lines the mucous membrane. It lines the mucous membrane. So if I make a small soluble bolus and ask the person to just slightly chill it and deglutinate it, it lines whole of the esophagus. And when it lines the whole of the esophagus, I am able to see the wall of the esophagus. If there is ulcer, I can identify. If there is a growth, I can identify as a feeling defect or something which we know that esophagus starts from C6 level, ends at T11. So it has to pass partly from the neck region, partly from the thorax, and then in the abdominal cavity. So when it is passing from the thorax, it has to pass from mediastinum. So any mediastinal mass can compress on the esophagus. What is the chief sign? Is usually patient comes with a complaint of either regurgitation or difficulty during swallowing. Difficulty during solvent. So when it comes like that, barium sulfate lines we will be able to see. So whenever we want to study the esophagus, we call it as barium solid. We call it as barium solid. If I take 100 or 150 ml of liquid barium, I drink it, where it is going to go? It is going to go in the stomach. Once it goes in the stomach, we ask the patient to move right and then left, then again the right, so it lines whole of the stomach. And that is what we call as a barium meal. That is what we call. So when I study the stomach with the barium sulfate, I call it as barium meal. We know that stomach has what we call it as the storage capacity. So emptying will take some time. Once the emptying is taken place, now it will start coming into the small intestine. And when I start visualizing the small intestine, we call it as barium follow through. We call it as barium follow through. So we are divided barium studies into 3 parts. One, if I want to study the esophagus, I call it as barium solid. I call it as barium solid. If I want to see the stomach, then we call it as barium meal. Barium meal. Then I can see whole outline. I will show some pictures, but remember this moment. When I have to study the small intestine, I call it as the barium follow through. So we'll go only one contraindication from barium sulfate. Again, we prepare the patient like a KUP, NPM, give the anti-gas drugs and laxatives. So barium sulfate lines mucus lining. What is contraindication of this? Most important contraindication is a suspected perforation. So remember, this is what is most important. If I suspect that there is stomach perforation or intestinal perforation, we don't do the barium sulfate studies, because barium sulfate is very highly irritant to the peritoneum and it will lead to fibrosis and intestinal obstruction. So rather than helping, we are doing it this one. Okay, then this is what we see, barium solid. You can see the oral cavity, you can see the oropharynx, then you can see now here there is the laryngopharynx, here there is a narrowing. So Manjari Madam has told you, in the laryngopharynx, if the mucosa comes out, that is what we call it as Killian's dehiscence. That is what we call it as the Killian's dehiscence. So that Killian's dehiscence can be identified. Then I can see in the neck region the remaining esophagus. As I go into the thorax, I can see the whole esophagus in the thorax, and it is reaching up to the stomach. It is reaching up to the stomach. So this is what we call as a barium solid. Fuse excess, you can see all the things. Aortic arch, which is giving the pressure here, left bronchus second, left atrium third. So you can see whole of this barium solid. You can see the whole of this barium solid, and as it reaches to the stomach, it slightly gets narrow because there is a cardiac sphincter. So here, so there will be the cardiac sphincter. Indications: difficulty in swallowing, that is called dysphagia, regurgitation, esophageal diverticulosis, esophageal ulcer, physiological disorders of swallowing. How to do it? That is what we just, that's 50% of suspension of 100 ml of barium sulfate that is being asked to be taken. These are abnormalities. You can see my aorta is enlarged. So what will there will be bigger compression on the aortic aneurysm, which can be a compression, again difficulty in swallowing. There can be an obstruction because of the esophageal carcinoma. So the food or barium solid will be accumulated here. Through very narrow channel it is going forward. Then you can see in the third, this one, you can see the ulcers, esophageal ulcers. Or if there is this is a left bronchus with lot of lymph nodes which are enlarged in the fourth slide. And you can see there is a compression from outside of this. So all these things we can study in the barium solid. Barium meal, we can see all the stomach line. We can see the fundic gas bubble. Then we can see here, this is a pyloric sphincter and the first part of the duodenum will be said. And this is what we call as the duodenal cap. This is what we call it as the duodenal cap. So indication: gastric acid peptic ulcer disease, gastritis, fullness in gastric region, motility disorders. How to do it the same way? We use 300 to 400 ml of 5% barium sulfate, asked to drain. Patient asked to move side to side. Can we replace this study? Yes, for certain things, yes, we can replace it. We nowadays do the endoscopies, and that endoscopies we can directly visualize the mucosa. We can directly visualize the ulcers. But for studying the stomach, we purchase a barium wheel, and then we see ulcer. You can see the big ulcer in the stomach and the compressions. Barium follow through. That is for small intestine. That is for small intestine. Okay. When the barium follow, can you see all of the small intestine can be seen very clearly. You can see the what is called walls of Kerckering in the intestine. You can the mucosal folds. You can see the foreign body in the small intestine. Okay. So this is what is called as the barium follow through. Then when I see now fourth part, if I want to study the large intestine, I can give the barium sulfate from the anal canal. And that's why the word is there, barium enema. It is called barium enema. In a barium enema, we give the barium sulfate as enema from the anal canal. So we can see the sigmoid sign, rectum, sigmoid, then descending colon, then the transverse colon, and we can see the ascending colon, the cecum appendix. And you can see clear-cut difference. That is what we are studying, that the large intestine has sacculations. Large intestines have the sacculations. This is what we say barium enema. So in short, barium studies are divided into four. If I want to study the esophagus, that is what you have to remember, it's called barium swallow. If I want to study the stomach, it is called barium meal. If I want to study the small intestine, I call it as barium follow through. And when I want to study the large intestine, I will do the barium enema. Okay. So what we see, can you see here one more thing? Here, can you see a small wire-like structure is seen? This is tapeworm in the large intestine. Then, as I go ahead, you can see multiple. Colon shows multiple small ulcers. This is what we call ulcerative colitis. Very common in the urban population, giving rise to a lot of small ulcers in large intestine. Potentially, they are one of the causes of future carcinoma. That is what we call ulcerative colitis. Now, we shift to the important topic of today, that is called IVP, intravenous pyelography. Guys, please remember this word, IVP, intravenous pyelography. It means we are using the property of the kidney. Kidney filters the blood. Yes, correct. So what happens? I give a dye. I will show you. I will give the dye. And when I give the dye, what happens? When I give the dye through the intravenous line, what will happen? Once the dye is given, that is usually called as urographene. That is what we usually call it as urographene. This urographene dye passes from the bloodstream, comes into the circulation, then it reaches to the kidney after a few moments, and it starts getting filtered. That is what we call GFR, glomerular filtration. And when it goes from the glomerular filtration, what will happen? It comes into the kidney. First, it will show slightly outer border of the kidney, that is cortex. If you try to see it here, can you see it here? You can see the outer border of the kidney. This is what is the I will see in the cortex. Then I can see in the minor calyces, major calyces, and all those things. And you can see the minor calyces, major calyces here. And then we can see the dyes coming into the ureter, and then it goes down to the bladder. So I can trace whole of the kidney. What is basic importance of this IVP? IVP is done to study both the structure, where is the obstruction, it is anatomical things, and also we can understand, does the kidney is functioning properly or not? Does the kidney is functioning properly or not? So we take serial X-rays. First we do the KUV. Then we, after 5 minutes, if you read it here, it is written here, down in the second X-ray, right side, That is what we call it as a 5 minutes X-ray. We start seeing the minor calyces. Then we do the 15-minute X-rays. We can see the minor calyces, major calyces, renal pelvis. I can see in the 30 minutes X-ray that all of the dye started percolating from the whole of the ureter. I can see whole course of the ureter and finally reaching to the urinary bladder. Then we do it as pre-void. That is after 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I can see the dye is in the bladder is completely full. And then we ask the patient to maturate. So the dye should come out, and then there will be empty bladder. What happens? Do you remember how the bladder urethra can get obstructed? One thing is that there is an enlarged prostate which can obstruct, so that the post-void still the dye will be there in the bladder. One. Second thing is that either there will be a stone, urinary stone or bladder stone, which can also obstruct the passage. That is what we can see. Second thing, what we can see in ureter, there can be an obstruction. And what it will do, whenever there is obstruction, there will be back pressure. Because kidney is still functional. What it will make? It will make the major and minor calyces dilated. So that can be seen. So I will show you the next exercise. So what first we have to understand, we keep a dye from the IV line. It gets filtered from the blood and it comes into whole of the urinary tract. So we see there the outer margin of the kidney, then we see the minor calyces, then we see the major calyces, we see the renal pelvis, then we see the ureter, and then finally we see the bladder. And we study, does the bladder is also functioning or not? But when the dye is filtered, that means kidney is normal. So this is what we call as IVP. So we have to remember IVP means we give a dye, is usually called as urographin, which filters through the kidney, which is a body-friendly dye. So go ahead. Just chapter. Okay. So intravenous pyelography. What it says, IVP gives anatomical and physiological aspect of the kidney. Indications, hydronephrosis, suspected hydronephrosis. We just explain this term. Hematuria. Hydronephrosis means dilatation of major and minor calyces. Hematuria means a bleeding from the urine. So that is what we call hematuria. Suspected renal calculus, where it is obstructing. Renal trauma, the renal function can be done. Then the persistent pus in the urine, that is called persistent pyuria, usually tuberculous. Workup before renal transplant. We want to understand, does there is any anomaly with the renal kidney, whose kidney can be transplanted? Does there is any bifurcation of ureter? We have to understand. Does the kidney is in position to see? All this, for all these indications, we do IVP. Developmental anomalies of urinary tract. That is the last indication. Okay. Then how to do it? We prepare for as if it is for KUB. We give a dye called as urographin or Canary 420. Usually we use urographin, IV dye. Just before the KUB done, we take the X-rays at 6 levels. Just before KUB, that is one X-ray. Then after 5 minutes, then 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes are called pre-void. The bladder is full, and post-void means when the bladder is getting emptied. Contraindication, only whenever we suspect renal failure or the hepatic failure, we don't do this study. Advanced cardiac disease, because it can give additional effect on the heart to function. So if there is very advanced cardiac disease, we don't do the IVP. Okay, so these are how we do it and contraindications. So now, if you can to see, this is first normal thing. What you can see all these things, correct? Here it is written. When you just see, or whenever you see this slide, X-ray, always it is written 5 minutes X-ray. It is written 15 minutes X-ray. You can see it is in 30 minutes. You can see the renal, outline. Then you can see the minor calyces. Then you can see the major calyces, renal pelvis. Correct? and then you can see the ureter, whole course of the ureter, and then you can see the bladder. This is 30 minutes. This is post-void, right side. What you see here now? Can you see this two different things? Can you see two ureters, bifurcation of ureter? This can be identified on duplication of ureter. This can be identified on the IVP. Then can you see now there's a difference, right and left side, right and left side. Can you see here? You can see the minor callousness, you can see major callousness, you can see whole of the ureter. If you try this on other side, can you see major and minor callousness are dilated? And I cannot see the ureter. Probably in this region there is a stone which is obstructed. So that is what we call hydronephrosis. This is what we call as the hydronephrosis. You can see in another slide on the right side, you can see huge hydronephrosis, even dilated ureter, and suddenly at the pelvic brim, here probably there is a stone which is not allowing further flow. And that is what we call it as the hydronephrosis with dilated ureter. So I know the position where the stone is there and I can do the proper surgery for this. Okay. Then now, so you can see in the IVP, you can see dilated ureters, you can see the functioning ears one, you can see the, this is what we have to remember, hydronephrosis. Now, let's move further. And we want to study now another part called as a female genital system. So for female genital system, specially done for patency of the uterine cavity, if there is fibrosis, something like, and patency of fallopian tube. That's why the word is there. Stero, it stands for uterus. Salpingography. Salpinx means the fallopian tube. So we call it as hysterosalpingography. We call it as the hysterosalpingography. Hysterosalpingography is done in the female infertility cases. What we study in female infertility? We want to study first, does the patient is ovulating? So we do the ultrasound of the ovary. We call it as the follicle study. If I find any difficulty, that there is no follicle growing, then I do study the pituitary hormones. Does the hormone levels are not? That is one level. Second level, I want to study the tract. And to study the tract, what we will require, that we want that I should be able to see the internal cavity of the uterus, and I should be able to see the fallopian tube. One more thing, if you remember, fallopian tubes open into pouch of Douglas. It is an open cavity in the pouch of Douglas. So what I can do, I can use a dye which I can push from the cervix, so it can line the uterus. Usually it is urographin and all these things, and then we don't use barium sulfate. Please remember, because fallopian tubes are open into the peritoneal cavity during pouch of Douglas. So that is not good. Only what we can use is urographin. We can push the dye from the cervix, and you can see the uterine cavity. It is very small, hardly 7 to 8 ml, non-pregnant uterus, 5 to 7 ml, and fallopian tube hardly 2 to 3 ml. So usually 7 to 10 ml of dye, we push it. When we push, we can see whole lining, and some amount of dye trickles. If the fallopian tubes are pitted, then they trickle into the pouch of Douglas. Usually, patient gives a slight complaint of discomfort. We do the X-ray, but this is a sign that okay, whole of the tract is open. I don't know what we talk about. So the procedure is called hysterosalpingography. How we do it? We go one by one. How we do it? Indications: suspected tubal blockage. It is for the infertile patient. Commonest in India because of one of the diseases that is usually called PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, or tuberculosis. That is one. Then second is uterine tumors. We know that is very common. That is fibroid, or also we call it in scientific term leiomyoma. We call it as leiomyoma. It is uterine tumors. Then developmental anomalies. That is called bicornuate uterus. Two uterine tubes or two uterine, that is para-mesonephric uterus, they don't unite. And and that is what we call it as bicornuate uterus. That is what we call it as bicornuate uterus, and that bicornuate uterus can be again diagnosed. We can see the straightway two cavities. We see the two cavities, and that is what we call bicornuate uterus. Then septate uterus. There will be septum in the uterus that can be seen. These two things, bicornuate, septate, in modern day also can be studied by using a fiber optic cable. We call this as histoscopy. We call it as hysteroscopy. Hysteroscopy. Then there is a, I'm not saying bow, it is called as a bad obstetric history. It is called bad obstetric history. That is again one of the indication for hysterosalpingography procedure. We have a cannula. We use the again the urography or the Connolly 280 as a dye. Please remember, we don't use barium sulfate in hysterosalpingography. Again, this is what you have to remember. Patient already had a menstrual phase after 8 to 10 days after menstrual phase. That is the first important thing, so that we are ruling out the pregnancy. Second thing is that at 8 to 10 days, the cervix is slightly open, and then what we do? We push 7 to 9 ml of dye. We put 7 to 9 ml of dye in it. And that dye, remember, dye should not be too much, because if I give too much of dye and I push it, what will happen? Large amount of dye will come into the peritoneum. Patient will have a lot of pain, can vomit also. So we have to use 7 to 9 ml. These are the questions which are asked usually. Okay, so this is what we call as 7 to 9 ml of dye. Okay, then what we do? See, so this is what basic fundamental thing. You try to see. Can you see there is a cannula below? And this cannula can be seen here. This is called hysterosalpingo cannula, which is put. You can see very nicely on the right side, a serrated ending, so that can be put into the cervix, and a dye is pushed. And once I push the dye, what you see here? You see here the margin. Can you see this triangular structure? This is the uterine cavity. Okay, so uterine cavity is very small, thin, and it is triangular in shape. And as I reach here, this funding part of the uterus, and now it is going into the corneal end. It is going to the corneal end, and from corneal end, it is going into the fallopian tubes. It is going into the fallopian tubes, and it is coming into the end of the fallopian tubes, and it will finally trickle into the pouch of terminus. So this is what we do. We want to study whole tract. We want to study the whole tract. This is what normal 2 and this one. Then if I go ahead, can you see here now? Okay, this uterine cavity is seen properly, but now see the fallopian tubes which are enlarged. This is what we call it as hydrosalpinx. This is what we call it as the hydrosalpinx, and this hydrosalpinx, you can see dilated one and it is blocked one. Second thing, can you see two cavities in uterine cavity on the right side, and these two cavities in uterine cavity, that is bicornuate or septate uterus. This is what we call bicornuate or septate uterus. Okay, so far we have seen IVP, intravenous pyelography, and what we have seen SCG, hysterosalpingography. Hysterosalpingography is done in female infertility patients, especially to study the genital tract, especially uterine cavity and fallopian tubes. That is what we have to remember. We are going to use on 8th or 9th, 10th day after menses in a cycle. We use the dye to inject to see the uterine cavity. Now, we'll just move to the next topic, that is pelvis. In pelvis, what we are supposed to do, how we do the pelvis. Remember one thing, whenever we do the X-ray pelvis, what we have to remember, both sides of pelvis must be seen. It should be, what are the indications? It should be grammar fracture, very rare, but it can be there in the severe traumas, especially very common in the fast injuries, fast track injuries, severe type, anterior fractures, and superior inferior pubic grammar fracture, dislocation of pelvis surfaces. Posteriorly, through the ala of the sacrum and ilium, dislocation of sacroiliac joint, very rare, but it is there. So what we do, posterior dislocate dashboard injuries and all those things, congenital dislocation of hip joint and the fracture neck femur. This is again will coming in the part of the extremity, intracapsular fracture extensor. This is what we're supposed to see. Now just describe here. And next time we'll talk about the extrinsic extremity. At that time we'll again come in detail about this. What we see in the pelvis. Remember, whenever I take the X-ray pelvis and with the two hip joints, always both side has to be in X-ray. That is the most important aspect. That is what we have to remember. Both sides should come, so I can compare these things. So what are the structures? As usual, first we see the bony ligaments. First we see the lower few lumbar vertebrae, 1 and 2. That is L4, L5. Then I see whole of the sacrum, and in the sacrum I can see the promontory and rest of the body, or ala of the sacrum, and I can see very clearly sacroiliac joints. Then the hip bone, which is showing here, one is called the ilium, then there is the ischium, and this is a pubic symphysis. Ilium, ischium, and a pubic symphysis. So now pubic symphysis and pubic bone. You can see the obturator canal. Then you can see the acetabular cavity. You can see the head of the femur. You can see the neck of the femur. You can see the greater trochanter of the femur. And can you, if I make a line here, line from the neck of the femur, up to obturator canal, it is smooth, curved on the both sides. This is what we call as Shelton's line. This is what we call as the Shelton's line. So we identify the bone, two lumbar vertebrae, sacrum, coccyx, hip bone, three parts, ilium, ischium, pubic bone. Then I identify the upper part of the femur. Then I can see that in the upper part of femur, I can see the head of the femur, I can see the neck of the femur, I can see the greater. Always we compare both sides together, and it is easy then to understand things. Then we study. Now we study on the hip bone. You can see the anterior superior spine. You can see anterior inferior spine. You can see the ischial tuberosity. Then we can see the pubic tubercle, pubic crust, and pectinate line. Then I can see the opening to the obturator foramen. And on the femur, we see the head of the femur, and head of the femur snugly fits the acetabular cavity. You can see small cavity in between. Then I can see the neck of the femur is most important, because in LV extremity we talk about the fracture neck femur. Is what we talk about, and then we talk about the greater trochanter. Okay, so what happens when I see next? This line, dotted line. This is what we call as a Shelton's line. Whenever the whole thing is normal, there is no fracture, this Shelton's line can be seen very clearly on the right side. But if you see on the left side, what happened here? See this line, if I try to draw, it is not incongruous. There is a fracture neck femur. So the Shelton's line is broken. And that is what we call as a sign. And then we can think about any problem with the hip joint. That is what we are trying to say. The Shelton's line should be smooth, curved. We draw it on the X-ray and you can see it. But if it is disturbed, then that probably is fracture neck femur or dislocation of the hip joint. So that is what we identify. Okay. See here, there is a fracture neck femur. You can see the intracapsular fracture, and then it is started getting degenerated. So what we do, we replace it. What will happen to replace it? That we put the prosthesis. Can you see this whole hip joint is replaced, and a part of this prosthesis is going into the medulla of the femur. This is what we call as Austin-Morse prosthesis. This is what we call as the Austin-Morse prosthesis. If the fracture is extracapsular, in the previous days we used to put the nail. Okay, but now what we do, we put the nail with the supply. I will show it the next time. So this is what we talk about the pelvis. So what you have to remember first, pelvis X-ray. Please remember, here you are not seeing. Why I showed this pelvis? Here you are not seeing the uterine cavity. It is not SCG. It is X-ray pelvis. This is what a common mistake is done. This is X-ray pelvis. And if you go into this one, histosalpingography, you see clear-cut the uterine cavity, the triangular structure filled with this one. You can see the cannula, you can see the uterine cavity and fallopian tube. So this is histosalpingography. Okay, please remember this. Histosalpingography, you clearly see the uterine cavity, you see the dye coming inside. But when you want to see the pelvis, pelvis X-ray will not show all these things. Pelvic X-ray will be clear. You are not seeing here the uterine cavity. Okay, this is what you have to remember. That's why I showed the pelvis. I will take in the pelvis again and we'll talk about X-rays inferior extremity. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll, we'll talk, and I will also put up this two next week definitely on our WhatsApp group as a video lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.